I suppose I should start by telling you that I wasn't always the kind of woman who did what I did that night. If you looked at my life from the outside, you'd think I had it all. A devoted husband who adored me, a cozy home in the suburbs, and a career that paid the bills and then some. My marriage wasn't perfect, but whose is? We had our share of arguments, but we loved each other, or at least I thought we did. The company Christmas party that year was a grand affair. The kind of event that made you forget you were just another cog in a corporate machine. Held at an upscale hotel downtown, it boasted a glittering tree that stretched to the ceiling, twinkling lights casting a golden glow across the room, and the constant clinking of glasses as coworkers laughed and celebrated the season. I arrived alone, as my husband had declined the invitation, calling it a boring corporate thing. I wore a little black dress that hugged me in all the right places, paired with red heels I hadn't worn in years. I told myself I dressed up to fit in, but deep down I wanted to feel desired again. And that's when I saw him, Michael, my supervisor. He was standing near the bar, chatting with a group of our coworkers. Michael wasn't just a man. He was a presence, tall, broad-shouldered, and with a confidence that seemed to radiate off him. He wore a tailored suit that fit him like a glove, the crisp white shirt beneath it unbuttoned just enough to hint at his toned chest. Michael was the kind of man women noticed, even if they pretended not to. I'd noticed him too, of course, but I kept those thoughts buried, until that night. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, it felt as though the party around us faded. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. I quickly looked away, but my heart was already racing. I tried to avoid him for most of the evening, busying myself with small talk and sipping on a glass of wine, but Michael was persistent. He found me by the dessert table, leaning casually against it as he greeted me. "You look stunning tonight," he said, his voice smooth and low. I laughed nervously, brushing off the compliment. "Thanks. You clean up well yourself." He grinned, his eyes lingering on me just a moment too long. "Dance with me," he said suddenly, holding out his hand. I hesitated, glancing around. The dance floor was crowded, the music upbeat, but something in the way he looked at me made it impossible to say no. I placed my hand in his, and he led me onto the floor. The moment his hand rested on my waist, I felt a spark. It was electric, undeniable. We moved to the music, his body close to mine, his touch searing through the fabric of my dress. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so alive. As the music slowed, so did our movements. The festive crowd seemed to blur around us, and all I could focus on was the way his fingers brushed against my skin, the way his breath tickled my ear as he leaned in to speak. "Let's get some air," he murmured, his voice sending a shiver down my spine. I nodded, barely able to form a coherent thought as he led me away from the dance floor, away from the crowd. We ended up on the hotel's balcony, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The cool December air was a sharp contrast to the heat building between us. Michael turned to face me, his eyes locking onto mine. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch was gentle, yet it sent a jolt of electricity through me. "I've wanted to do this all night," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Before I could respond, his lips were on mine. The kiss was intense, his hand tangling in my hair as he pulled me closer. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away. But I didn't. Instead, I gave in, letting myself get lost in the moment as his lips moved against mine. A part of me wanted to pull away, to remind myself of the wedding ring on my finger. But another part, a darker, more primal part, wanted more. And just as things were heating up, I'm going to pause here. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I have more tales of forbidden love, betrayal, and temptation waiting for you. Trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, where was I? Oh yes, the kiss. It was the kind of kiss that made you forget your name, your responsibilities, your promises. As his hands moved to my waist, pulling me even closer, I knew I was on the edge of something dangerous, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop. The music thumped faintly behind us as we stood on the balcony, the cold air wrapping around us like a warning I refused to heed. My mind raced with every possible outcome of what I was doing, but his presence, his warmth, drowned out the rational part of me. It was as though the rest of the world didn't exist. Michael pulled back slightly, his lips hovering near mine, his breath warm and steady. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered, his voice smooth, confident, and maddeningly irresistible. I should have walked away right then. I should have apologized, made some excuse, and gone back inside to drown myself in more wine and guilt. But I didn't. Instead, I let myself get swept away by the thrill of it all. The man who had occupied my daydreams for months was here, offering me something forbidden, something I hadn't realized I craved. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filtered out from the party, a distant reminder of where we were and who I was. Yet all I could think about was the way his hands lingered on my hips and the intensity in his gaze. "Come back inside," he said, his lips brushing against my ear. "Let's dance." I nodded, my voice caught somewhere in my throat. He offered me his hand, and I took it, letting him lead me back into the chaos of the party. The room felt hotter, louder, as though the air was charged with something electric, or maybe that was just me. The music shifted to a slow, sultry melody, and Michael didn't waste a second pulling me close. His hand slid to my lower back, his body pressing against mine in a way that made it impossible to think clearly. My hands rested on his shoulders, and though my heart screamed at me to let go, my fingers clung to the fabric of his suit. "You feel incredible," he murmured, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I swallowed hard, my mind flickering to images of my husband at home, probably watching TV or already asleep. The thought should have made me pull away, but instead, it fueled the storm of emotions brewing inside me. Guilt mingled with excitement, creating a heady cocktail that I couldn't resist. As we swayed to the music, his hand traveled upward, brushing the bare skin of my back where my dress dipped low. The touch was subtle but deliberate, sending shivers through me. He leaned down, his lips barely grazing my neck, and my breath hitched. "Michael," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was pleading for him to stop or keep going. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice heavy with desire. "If you want me to, I will." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I leaned into him, my head resting against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It matched the wild tempo of my own. When the song ended, he didn't let go. Instead, he took my hand and led me off the dance floor, away from the watchful eyes of our coworkers. We ended up in a quieter corner of the room, near the towering Christmas tree. The golden lights reflected in his eyes, making him look almost otherworldly. "We can't," I said, though the conviction in my voice was weak at best. He tilted his head, studying me. "Why not?" I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Because I'm married. Because this is wrong. And yet here you are," he said, stepping closer. His voice was calm, steady, as though he knew I wasn't going anywhere. I hated how right he was. My heart pounded as he reached out, his fingers brushing against my cheek. "I see the way you look at me," he continued, "the way your breath catches when I'm near. You want this as much as I do." His words were like a match striking against my resolve, setting it ablaze. I felt my defenses crumbling, my willpower slipping away with every passing second. I couldn't deny it any longer. I wanted him, not just in a fleeting, harmless way, but in a way that made my entire body ache with longing. Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss was soft at first, testing the waters, but when I didn't pull away, it deepened. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself melting into him. And just like that, I'm going to pause again. If you're enjoying this story and want more tales like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Trust me, there's so much more to come. Secrets, desires, and forbidden passions that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Back to the story. As the kiss intensified, I felt the world around us disappear. It was just him and me, locked in a moment that felt both thrilling and terrifying. His touch was firm yet gentle, his lips exploring mine with a hunger that mirrored my own. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his hands still on my waist. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice rough with desire. I hesitated, the reality of what I was doing crashing down on me. But as I looked into his eyes, filled with a mix of longing and certainty, I found myself nodding. "Okay," I whispered. He smiled, taking my hand in his as he led me away. I couldn't help but wonder where this night would take me, and if I'd ever be the same again. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing us off from the world. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure Michael could hear it. The soft hum of the elevator filled the silence between us, but the tension crackled like static electricity. He stood close, too close, his scent of cedarwood and something darker filling my senses. As the elevator ascended, my reflection in the polished steel walls caught my eye. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips slightly swollen from a kiss she shouldn't have allowed. I felt like a stranger to myself, but I couldn't seem to stop. When we reached his floor, Michael took my hand, his fingers warm and firm around mine. He didn't say a word as he led me down the hallway to his hotel room. I should have been pulling away, running in the opposite direction. Instead, I followed him, every step a betrayal of the vows I had made years ago. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, the floodgates opened. He pressed me against the wall, his lips crashing onto mine with a fervor that left me breathless. My hands found their way to his chest, sliding over the firm planes of muscle beneath his shirt. I knew this was wrong, but the thrill of it, the forbidden nature of it all, made it impossible to stop. "Do you have any idea how long I've wanted this?" he murmured against my lips, his hands roaming over my body. I couldn't answer. Words seemed irrelevant when his touch was speaking volumes. His lips moved to my neck, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin there, and I let out a soft gasp. "Michael," I breathed, my voice a mix of desire and desperation. He pulled back slightly, his eyes locking onto mine. "Tell me to stop," he said again, his voice low and hoarse. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. Instead of answering, I pulled him closer, my fingers tangling in his hair as our lips met again. It was as though a dam had broken, and all the pent-up longing, the unspoken tension between us, came rushing out in a tidal wave of passion. As he led me toward the bed, my mind screamed at me to stop, to think about what I was doing, about the man waiting for me at home. But my body was already too far gone, surrendering to the moment, to him. We collapsed onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and desire. His hands were everywhere, exploring, claiming, and I felt myself slipping further into the abyss. It was intoxicating, this feeling of being wanted so completely, so unapologetically. But just as things were reaching their peak, a sharp pang of guilt pierced through the haze. My wedding ring caught the light, a glaring reminder of everything I was risking, everything I stood to lose. "Wait," I said suddenly, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael froze, his eyes searching mine. "What's wrong?" My throat felt dry, the words catching as I tried to form them. "I can't do this." His brow furrowed, and for a moment I thought he would argue. But then he sat back, running a hand through his hair. "Are you sure?" I nodded, though my body ached with the effort of pulling away. I need a minute." He sighed, leaning back against the headboard. "Take your time," he said, though the frustration in his voice was clear. I sat there for a moment, staring at my hands, at the ring that symbolized a commitment I had just come dangerously close to shattering. What was I doing? How had I let it get this far? And yet, even as the guilt surged through me, there was still a part of me that didn't want to leave, a part that wanted to stay in that room, in his arms, and forget about everything else. If you've ever felt the pull of temptation. Here's the text converted into a paragraph as requested. The allure of something or someone you know you shouldn't want, then you'll understand what I'm saying. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. There are more tales of passion, betrayal, and the human heart to explore. I glanced over at Michael. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. "What happens now?" I asked softly. "That's up to you," he said. "But whatever you decide, I want you to know I don't regret this." His words sent a jolt through me. I wished I could say the same, but the truth was far more complicated. After what felt like an eternity, I stood. "I should go," I said, though the words felt heavy in my mouth. He nodded, his jaw tight. "I won't stop you, but if you ever change your mind..." I didn't let him finish. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart pounding as I made my way back to the elevator. The ride down was a blur, my mind spinning with everything that had just happened. When I stepped out into the cold night air, I took a deep breath, hoping it would clear my head, but the weight of my actions, of what I had almost done, pressed down on me like a storm cloud. As I hailed a cab, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right choice. And as the city lights blurred past the window, I realized that, for better or worse, this night would stay with me forever. I arrived home that night feeling like a stranger in my own skin. The house was quiet, the glow from the TV casting soft shadows across the living room. My husband, David, was asleep on the couch, his head tilted at an awkward angle, the sound of his gentle snoring filling the space. I paused in the doorway, the weight of everything I had done, everything I had almost done, settling on my chest like a boulder. The guilt was suffocating, an ache that no amount of rationalization could soothe. As I walked toward him, I noticed the blanket draped over his legs, the empty coffee mug on the table. These small, unremarkable details suddenly felt monumental, reminders of the life we had built together. I knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. He stirred slightly, blinking up at me with sleepy eyes. "You're home," he murmured, his voice groggy but warm. "Yeah," I said softly, my throat tight. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "How was the party?" I hesitated, the question hanging in the air like a noose. How was I supposed to answer that? Should I tell him about Michael, about the kiss, the touch, the way I'd let myself get swept away? Or should I bury it deep, let it fester in the corners of my mind where no one could find it? "It was fine," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, pulling me into his arms. The familiarity of his embrace was both comforting and crushing, a stark contrast to the chaos of the night. "I missed you," he said, his words muffled against my hair. "I missed you too," I lied, though the truth wasn't that simple. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and avoidance. At work, I avoided Michael like the plague, ducking into side hallways and skipping meetings to ensure I wouldn't run into him. But it was impossible to avoid the memory of that night. It haunted me, replaying in my mind like a broken record. Michael, of course, wasn't making it easy. He sent me subtle texts, nothing overtly incriminating, but enough to remind me of what we had shared. "Thinking about you," one read. "Miss seeing you at the meeting today," said another. Each message felt like a spark threatening to reignite the fire I was desperately trying to extinguish. One evening, as David and I were sitting at the dinner table, the weight of my secret became unbearable. He was talking about his day, something about a client meeting and a funny story from the office, but I wasn't listening. My mind was miles away, trapped in the memory of that forbidden night. "Are you okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concern. I nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. The guilt was eating me alive, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I couldn't keep this up. Not with him, not with myself. "David," I said suddenly, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression shifting to one of concern. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I tried to find the words. "I need to tell you something." His eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering across his face. "Okay." I hesitated, the words lodged in my throat like shards of glass. But I knew I couldn't keep it inside any longer. At the company Christmas party, my voice broke, tears welling up in my eyes. His expression darkened and he set his fork down. What happened? I kissed someone, I blurted out, the confession tumbling out like a tidal wave. It didn't go further than that, but it shouldn't have happened. I'm so sorry, David. The silence that followed was deafening. He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and hurt. You kissed someone, he repeated, as though saying it out loud would make it more real. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake. I don't even know what I was thinking. I swear it didn't mean anything. His jaw tightened and he stood, pacing the length of the room. Who was it? I hesitated, unsure if revealing Michael's identity would make things better or worse. It doesn't matter. It was just a moment of weakness, and I regret it more than anything. Doesn't matter, he snapped, his voice rising. You kissed another man, and now you're telling me it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, I said again, my voice breaking. I love you, David. Please believe me, it won't happen again. He stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping as the anger drained from his face, replaced by a profound sadness. I don't know if I can do this, he said quietly. Do what? I asked, my heart sinking. Trust you, he replied, his voice heavy with pain. How am I supposed to trust you after this? The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. David withdrew from me, his warmth replaced by a cold distance that felt unbearable. I tried to make amends, to show him how sorry I was, but the damage had been done. And Michael, he didn't take my silence well. He confronted me at work one day, demanding to know why I was ignoring him. It's over, I told him firmly. Whatever this was, it's done. I can't lose my husband. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. If that's what you want, he said finally, though his tone suggested otherwise. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that's happened, I realize just how close I came to losing everything. The thrill, the excitement, the passion. It wasn't worth the pain, the guilt, the broken trust. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that temptation is a dangerous game, one that can destroy even the strongest of bonds. If this story has resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more tales of love, betrayal, and redemption. Life is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes heartbreaking, but there's always a lesson to be learned. And as for me, I'm still learning.